Like E is very different than D, is different enough than H, is spectacularly different than, something like S or GIF. Anyways, let's switch over to YouTube now, and I'll give the intro, and then, yeah, it'll be a good day, I think. So, warning, 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 warning. The following program is recorded live and is not intended for children. This program may contain dark and graphic content that may be distressing for some viewers and against the terms of service for some platforms. The themes and opinions expressed in this program should be considered entirely fictional and should not be used for political or academic purposes. Facts are not checked, and no sources or citations will be provided. Should you choose to redistribute, please do so only in good faith. Thank you again for joining us. Viewer and listener discretion is advised. God. Reverse ASMR. Hello, and welcome back to Rainbows and Razor Blades, a show from the void. By the Gregorian calendar, it is currently the third day in the third month, the month of March, in the year of the Lord 2023. By the French Revolutionary calendar, it is currently the 13th day in the month of Ventos, the month of wind. So, on today's episode of Rainbows and Razor Blades, we're going to actually upload it today, I swear. I always say that, but then we always end up saying something way too problematic. And I end up being, it's one thing to, say problematic things and then joke about being canceled, and it's another thing to, actually say something that, is going to, there's a difference between getting, canceled because it's humorous and getting canceled because what you said is, we actually shouldn't really tolerate it on the platform. And there is actually a distinction there. Context isn't necessarily everything, but in a lot of cases, it can be and is. And that's how people who are, they say, I'll say it like this. They say overtly racist things. That's not necessarily against the terms of service for the platform. It depends on the context. If the context is you're a Mexican comedian and you get up on stage and you just say oh, no, 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 no. But if you start using slurs like the S word or like the B word, not shit or bitch. I can't say them, but, it starts to get a little more questionable. I think a more questionable point, and I'm not here to make argument against this or dwell on this the whole episode, but, the white people saying the N-word, black people are, it's not that they're allowed to, it's that who is the system to punish them for this? There's a lot of different words that should be banned, right? If you're one of those British nanny Karens who's just wants a nanny cam state, who's just they can't say cunt or shit or bitch or fuck. They can't say these words. I had to wait 3 minutes, by the way, so that we can still monetize. It looks like I was just under, so we're demonetized. So, so there is some leeway, right? But it's a gray area. Do you really want your entire show to be super hyper racist? Honestly, some people do. They definitely really do. And is it in good faith? For some of them, it definitely is, which is comical in a way. There's this one that I see a lot popping up on YouTube Shorts, because YouTube Shorts is always trying to anger bait me. It's always trying to flame bait me or really stupid opinion bait me. It'll be like a really macho dude with a beard, and he'll be he'll have I don't know 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 40,000 fake views. It doesn't matter because it's all fake. And he'll say something to the effect of just you're gonna just let your girl walk away from you? You should teach her a lesson. Or the next one, right, he'll pop back up again. I'll downvote it, right? It knows I care because I downvoted it. So it's if I neutral vote on something, it'll pop up again. If I downvote something, it'll pop up again. And if I upvote something, my whole feed starts to revolve around it, right? So either way, it's playing the same game. I'm not to be blamed for this popping up on my feed. It knows I'm a contrarian edgelord. It knows I want to disagree in the comment sections. That's why it's feeding it to me, because I've done that before. It knows my behavior. So it'll feed me some stupid opinion did your girl gain 10 pounds? That's your girl. You're just going to let her do that? And it's my job, right, as a leftist, progressive, liberal, transgender activist, is to go on there and make arguments against phobia and body autonomy and free will and ownership and patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever buzzwords it knows that the culture wars are being fought over. Personally, on a very personal spiritual level, I'm disengaged. I'm disinterested. I'm over it, but more than I'm over it, I'm through it. Like I've been there, done that. Like I just don't want to sit there and dwell on the triteness of it, the cliches, like I'm more liable to listen to Jordan Peterson talk about like the axiomatic presuppositions of like, the moral structure that people fabricate these opinions out of, or fabricate amongst each other, amongst chat GPT bots from God knows who, the CIA, whoever funds the TERFs, whatever it is, whatever the opinion of the day is that you're supposed to reach or not reach. So comedy kind of transcends that in a way. Like, there's definitely people who are super angry about it, but there's these two guys. I won't name them because I actually don't know their names and I don't care. One of them's a black dude, like his skin is black. I assume he is African heritage, but he speaks as though he's American, so I assume he's American. And a white dude who's pretty clearly American. And these two dudes sit next to each other as if they're news anchors, wearing, nice clothes like suits and ties, and they write each other's scripts. And the idea is to just make people laugh and make each other laugh and crack up on stage. And they do this by making the most, like, not just racially insensitive, but like it's literally the most racist jokes that they could say. So, and it's on YouTube, right? Like, that's my whole point. It's not about what they're actually saying. I could care less. Right? But like they used a word that I personally am not going to reuse. That's like the C word that isn't cunt. And I was just shocked. I was like, wait a minute. I thought there were certain words that were actually banned, but it turns out that there's not. Right? Like to say them in meta is one thing. But to say them in like a monetized video is another thing. Like again, it's contrarian edgelordism and it's being sold as comedy. And I'm not here to like redress that and say like we need more rules against it, right? Like I'm all for free speech. I don't mind that this is happening. I think it's probably actually good for the platform. I think it's good for society, believe it or not, even if what they're saying is reprehensible, although comedic. Right? Not to make apology for genuine racism, but like the things they're saying are genuinely taken out of the comedic context, genuinely racist, hence why they're funny. My show, this personal show, can be at times comical in a way that isn't blind to race, and more than that, it isn't going to be considerate of it. It's going to step in the dog shit. It's going to talk about it, and it's not that I'm proud of that or that I'm like, oh my gosh, my show is just like so racist and so great. It's just to say that like I'm not white. Like unironically, I'm not white, and I'm also not cis. Like I'm so far out of the normal paradigm. Like I pass white, right? I have white privilege. I understand that. So we can talk about that. I get that. But when it comes to my actual like ethnicity and heritage, like yes, I'm American. So is everybody else. But like that argument falls apart pretty quickly when you start talking about people that are like Latino Americans or worse, illegal immigrants. Dun 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 dun. Or legal immigrants, doesn't matter, but implying that somebody can be illegal, you can't make a person illegal. Vote for Hillary. Like, people's thoughts are not their own most of the time, and this was something that I learned before the internet. I mean, this is something that I learned in like preschool, like literally. I didn't really have concept of mind back then, but by kindergarten, I understood that most people had no ideas in their head. They had fundamentally, there was no fundamentals. There were no ideas. They weren't writing stories in their heads. They weren't trying to understand deeper meaning to things. They weren't even really trying to absorb or learn facts about their environment. They were just there. And I realized that most people were like just as interesting as a television screen, because I did have television when I was born. It did exist, but I wasn't like into it. You know what I mean? I was into torturing bugs, throwing rocks, pretending I was a Jedi, jumping over fences, training, rolling around in grass, eating things. Like whatever it is that infants do, I did all the way that through. But then I started realizing, right? Like people are interactive games. Everyone's always playing games. So I started watching, well, what games are which people playing? And this is before I had any concept awareness of things like gender, neurodivergence, other developmental disorders in general, trauma, like things that like now looking at children at that age, like I'm not looking at them as other children. I'm clearly not a child. And, but back then I had no concept. Same all the way. That was true all the way through until I was about 17, 18 years old. That's where I started to kind of like, and it took that long to start to kind of gain a concept of other people's minds, right? That wasn't just from the position of an autistic mimic, someone who was trying to understand them or subvert them, really truly exploit them, right? Kind of mirroring some of the narcissist abuse I had been piloted through Like, gaslighting is second nature to a narcissist. Gaslighting has to be learned and absorbed and assimilated by an autistic if it's not innate, right? If it's not part of the general block of constructed information that's going to manifest itself irrespective of where it grows up. Things like twin studies, for example, like there are certain predispositions that like they're going to manifest no matter what. Now, there's many others that it's like the nature versus nurture argument, that you can say is like, well, that's because of trauma. Like, for example, my hypervigilance, right? Like the neurosympathetic or whatever, the parasympathetic nervous system that kicks on where I just like, you start breathing, you just get really tense, you get fucking angry. Like you literally feel hostility because you're so worked up. But like that's hypervigilance if you get triggered, so-called triggered, right? Like people used to be like, you shouldn't care if you're triggered. But actually what those people were doing is just making apology for the fact that you'd been traumatized. And that's a huge part of American culture, mind you. That may be the core of the modern rotten West, in my opinion. Like the decadence may stem from that and the capitalist system, and the capitalist system uses that as an authoritative tool. The tooling of gaslighting that you aren't allowed to be triggered, and if you're triggered, it's a problem with you. Right? It otherizes the problem, right? So people, for example, here's a perfect example. I'm autistic. I'm pretty clear. I mean, well, you can't see it, but like I'm playing with the power cord. I'm just stimming it, and that is what it is. So people talk about things like self-diagnosis. Like I've been diagnosed by like quite a few professionals at this point with ADHD, which who the fuck knows what ADHD really is? People claim to know what it is. Oh, it's some dopamine. Oh, it's something to do with your receptors. Oh, it has to do with all this different stuff. But no one really fucking knows. No one has any idea what the hell they're talking about. And the very few people that do have not assessed me. So therefore, I am self-diagnosed with autism. Right? Like, it doesn't take a brainiac to realize that every other person who's saying that they are also autistic is either also every single one of them is misidentifying it, and it truly is a endemic problem with overdiagnosis, or alternatively, and this is what I always put forward in the comment sections when I'm being a contrarian edgelord on the internet and counter-trolling the propaganda proliferation process of like, what is it called? Antithetical groups to liberals, the wrong word, but progressive rights, right? Not PC, but progressive, right? Like instead of using the word retard, right? You take that out of your vocabulary, which is why we did not upload yesterday's episode. You take the word retard out of your vocabulary and you substitute it with something like intellectual disabilities or like intellectual developmental something or other. I forget what it is. There's some parlance that you're supposed to play games with, which like honestly fine. Like that's if you're gonna distinguish between like fucking retards, which is just terrible, right? And even if the bottom, if the floor, if the grime, if the bugs and the bigots, right, want to be like, I'm never gonna change. I'm a conservative. I can say whatever I want about you. Facts don't care about your feelings. Fine, so be it. But at least as professionals, as people who are talking about it as a level above, who are actually talking about like community healthcare, for example, or like family healthcare, for example. Like when your son comes out dysgenic and retarded, if you use those words, we still won't use those words, even if we have to pick up the pieces. And guess what? You're gonna be fucking well happy that we're not spitting those words back in your face and crossing our arms back at you. We don't want to help your retarded child, right? That's not how society is, at least right now. Like, there's a balance between that and like genociding and eugenics and Nazism. I mean, there's definitely a right-wing push that definitely wants that to be the final solution, right? For people who are born with intellectual disabilities, etc., or autism, and they definitely lump that one in. So they come to the comment sections, right? But they can't get all right wing about it. So their dog whistle or the trench line that does not get removed by the platform that they're fighting on, the battlefield that they're fighting on, like if they're on Instagram, for example, they can say something to the effects of, you're just self-diagnosing and that's not a real thing. You fake autistic people are just trying to get attention. It's like, assume for a moment that is true. Why are we doing it? Why are we doing it? Is it just for attention? If so, aren't there better ways to get attention? Like, you could change your gender. I mean, I'm a terrible example of this. Maybe the worst example you can find of this. But, like, wouldn't you, like, I don't know, change your gender to just be different? Like, I'm not a real girl. Everyone has to bend around me and my narcissism and has to use my pronouns, implying that the teachers who are, like, in the schools are people as conservatives in school. They're like, my teachers and this other students should not have to be forced to gender a child a certain way. You can't make laws against that. You can't make policies against that. But it's funny because if you like said like miss when it's misses, or like mister when it's like also mister because it's a patriarchy, but we don't denote the breeding status, I'll say, of, and traditionally it doesn't go back to gay marriage, so it really is like a breeding thing. It's like a familial wealth breeding thing where you have to say miss versus misses. Like, no one's attacking the institution of those, like, I don't know what they're called, like surnames. That's not it, like, because they're not pronouns. Like, miss and misses is not pronouns, it's honorifics perhaps. Like, no one's attacking the systemic institution of patriarchal oppression, yada yada yada, of that. Like, I don't see that as a common argument. And similarly, when they're talking about like child mutilation, right? I don't hear them making arguments against like the Judaic Semitic blood ritual of mutilating boys at birth. Like, I don't see those arguments. What I do see is to the effect of like, you guys are just looking for attention. You should work harder and get a job and do capitalism better than everyone else around you, and just don't talk about any of your problems because you invented them. Right? To me, that signals a lack of health care. I don't even care about the fact that there's ignorance saying that and putting that position forward. The fact that they can put that position forward shows you that there's a huge gap in the diagnostic process. Like, if these people got diagnosed, what then? Seriously, what then? Does the government, are they obligated by law to then start giving out like disability claims? Are we literally going to remove each and every individual drone who claims in quotations to be autistic? Are we going to remove them from the working pool and move them not just to the unemployment statistics, which looks really bad, but to the disabled and unable to work, which is even worse? Because like, if you have an elderly population, and then on top of that elderly population you have 20% of your young population, which is grossly outnumbered by the elder population, and 20% of them are just like, yeah, but we're autistic, we can't work, right? So there's a reason why that this mindset, this hostile mindset, which is, it has not been co-opted, it has been indoctrinated. It isn't it's a naturally occurring instinct to want to like bully weakness out of a group, and that is hijacked by puppeteers who have been indoctrinating for generations, long before the internet, people into this it's very Western American, it's industrial mindset of don't talk about your problems. They're not real problems, they don't exist, they're all in your head. It's gaslighting. The whole country is predicated on this, by the way. Don't bring us your problems, and don't talk about the fact that you have intellectual disabilities or physical abnormalities. Like, don't even consider that could be real. You're the problem. And actually, more than you're the problem, if you're going to continue to treat yourself as if your problems are real and like gender transition without the say so of a gatekeeper and like start ordering hormones in the internet, then you're a degenerate and you should be purged. So you can see they're actually not on your side, right? They're making quote unquote good faith arguments like, well, what about, the people who are saying that it's an overdiagnosis, or an overdiagnosis of ADHD crisis, actually what you were noticing is something that had been a long time coming to the surface. It's like saying, well, there's just too many transgenders now. It's an overdiagnosis. It's like people aren't being diagnosed as trans. That's the thing. They're not being diagnosed. They're coming out, right? There's a difference. It's the same thing with autism. We're not just being diagnosed and then we start acting this way because the doctor was like, well, I think you have autism. Go home and be autistic now. It's like, that's not how it is. Like, we're coming to them with very real problems. And when aggregated and mapped as data points into pools of overlapping traits, and only those overlapping traits, it becomes pretty evident pretty quickly which traits are divergent, which are not, generally speaking, present in mainstream, larger populations, right? And I'm not sure if this is like cross-cultural or how much culture can adapt the way that autism presents itself. I would assume that culture in some ways is more important than the autism, but the autistic experience, right, the sensorian, interoceptive, even I would say psychological experience of being autistic is probably somewhat universal among a wide spectrum, right? Like, being gay is a different experience for different gay men, right? But they're still gay men, and there are some things that are very much only in common with gay men. Like, for example, they're attracted to other male beings, for the most part, I guess. Who am I to say? I guess it could be a female being that looks like a male being and now we have to use all these pronouns. Like, you know what I mean? Like, but there are things about being autistic that are very specific to being neurodivergent and autistic. And those things, again, when aggregated and mapped, it shows us a lack of healthcare structure that is willing to even face the existence thereof. That's just how it is. Like, society really does want to turn its face and its back on the divergent. The divergent diffusion process of like evolution, like the, what is it, a mutagenic field? As things mutate and propagate forward in time, they become a little bit different, but some things stay very the same. And I think what we're seeing now is some things that have been the same for millennia, all of a sudden being talked about, because we've evolved the language the same way we've evolved technology, and we've also evolved technology to facilitate those conversations, which again we did not have a generation ago. In the 1970s, yeah, the Poindexter archetype from the 1950s with his clipboard and his overbite teeth and the squeaky voice, right? Like, where does that squeaky voice come from? I don't seem to have it, so maybe I'm not either that autistic, if you want to use it as like a measurement 1 to 10, which is not a good way to measure it, mind you, or perhaps that trait isn't inherently indicative of or rather I should say it is not a diagnostic criteria, right? Like, in order to be diagnosed as like a schizophrenic, for example, like, I think, and do not quote me, I am not a professional, I think you need to meet like 5 of the 8 major characteristics. And I'll just list a few because I don't even think I remember all of them. But for example, hallucinations, delusions, negative symptoms, I don't know what the rest are, but like you have to have 5 of them, right, in order to like be diagnosed. But here's what's really, really interesting about that. That means that 2 people can have completely different experiences. Like, if one person only has audio hallucinations and no delusions, but they're hearing shit all the time, and like they're able to dismiss it the same way that like malware, and I don't mean to liken schizophrenia to malware, but just for the sake of the analogy, it's like a pop-up pops up and it brings your attention to it. It's like, shit, now I have to like actively dismiss this process. I can't kill it in the background. I can't tell the executable to stop functioning because it's hardware. It's malfunctioning hardware or firmware, whatever it is. That, you know, you can't liken schizophrenia to a computer, but if you could, like Lane, like the anime Lane. So I think autism, Asperger's, but you can't say that anymore, and for good reason. He was a Nazi. I think it has undergone an evolutionary process of understanding that now what we're noticing is a underdiagnosis crisis where people have been suffering, and they've been suffering needlessly. They've been suffering under oppression. So how do we free these people? Because it isn't like a leftist struggle. It really isn't. Like, it's definitely more left than right, but it isn't a collectivist communist movement politically, right? Like, that's not, but I'm sure it could be co-opted that way. Like I said, if you were to have just everyone in a protest, just like every single man, and notice this has not happened, mind you, but say it was, right? Like, if all the men were just like, we hate trans people so much, which I don't think is true, but say they did, we hate them so much that we're all going to identify women and just ruin it for everybody. Like, wow, you sure beat us at our own game, man. In my hypothetical scenario. Anyways, thanks for listening to me babble today, guys. I've been talking for about 23 minutes, which means it is time that we can get into the news. Let me just set up really quick, make sure we are on the right page of privacy. It's a good thing I checked. We are not. Close that out. Open that up.